So, a little bit of background about Anne Frank because it's important that you understand her story before you start reading her diary. So, Anne Frank was a Jewish victim of the Holocaust. That means that she did not survive through the end of the war. She was born in Germany, but she lived most of her life near Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So, the Netherlands are uh, the neighbor of Germany, they're here right beside, and Amsterdam is the capital. This is Anne Frank shortly before she went into hiding, and this is the building where she was in hiding. So, again, this is the Netherlands and Germany sharing a border, and Amsterdam is right here. And the Netherlands were a safe place for Jews during the beginning of Hitler's reign. By 1938, 6,000 Jewish refugees had moved to the Netherlands from Germany and Poland. So they fled in that time period where it was still possible to leave. But even that safe space became dangerous in 1940 when Hitler invaded Holland. The Holland is another name for this country. So in 1940, all of those 6,000 Jewish refugees were kind of locked into German territory. Again, here's just a quick little map of all of Europe and then zoomed in on Amsterdam. So there's a map that shows almost all of this space being German occupied territory during the war. But the Netherlands is just a tiny little country right there at the top. It was one of the last places to fall, though. When Hitler invaded, the Dutch did resist for a while, and they were able to find 24,000 or hiding spaces for 24,000 Jews. However, that was barely 6% of the Jewish population in Holland. So that meant that a lot of Jewish people were left exposed or they were gathered up and put into concentration camps. Because Mr. Frank saw all of this happening, whenever Hitler rose to power in 1933, he was kind of had the foresight to know that things were going to get bad, and he moved his family to Amsterdam then. That was the same year that Hitler became chancellor and took over full dictator powership in Germany. They were trapped in Amsterdam as the Germans invaded the Netherlands in 1940, so they couldn't go anywhere. And he began preparing a place for them to hide, and they hid in the annex, which is what they call the hiding space where they were from 1942 to 1944. These are some pictures of that hiding place, and I'll show you those in a little bit more detail here in a second. Otto Frank decided to prepare a hiding place ahead of time. So after Holland was invaded in 1940, he began preparing supplies. So he worked for 2 years to set that place up. He recruited 5 very good Christian friends to help, and those people put themselves in danger. If you were caught helping a Jew, you were put into concentration camps as well, or arrested, and some people were even executed on the spot. So those people really put themselves at risk to help. He divided their belongings to Dutch neighbors because we've talked about how one of the things the Germans did where they kind of looted people's belongings, and it made it so the Jews didn't really have anything of value to sell or keep. So they couldn't get out, and they couldn't, they didn't have any purchasing power to try to escape. So he took all of their belongings and even their business, and he transferred it to people who could keep them in safe keeping until hopefully the war was over. He told his family very little about the plans, and as a parent, that makes a lot of sense to me. He had 2 teenage girls, and I don't think he could trust them to not tell classmates or tell friends or anything. So he just didn't tell anybody, really, including his wife. So he was making all these plans behind the scenes, and he didn't let anybody know that he was doing them except the people who he recruited to help. So they had their plans laid out, and everything was going according to plan until his oldest daughter, Margot, was called into deportation. So 8 days before they were supposed to go into hiding, Margot Frank got her deportation notice. So those would be the notices that would say, report to this train station. And then they would, from there, send people to concentration camps and, in many cases, their death. So he knew that he had to act very quickly. So instead of waiting until the day that they were going to go into hiding, they went that night. So they dressed in the clothes that they wanted to pack. So they were dressed at the beginning of the play. You'll see them dressed in layers. They packed everything that they could onto their bodies. So obviously that wouldn't be very much, because it would be obvious if you were kind of walking around like a Michelin man on the streets, or you wouldn't actually be able to physically layer that many clothes on top of each other because they wouldn't stretch that far. So they didn't have very much whenever they left. They left their home in disarray, so they made it look as if they had just kind of like thrown things around and grabbed what they could and left, which honestly is what they did, but they kind of staged it that way too. They left a notepad with a fake address for Switzerland, because Switzerland was neutral and you could flee there as a refugee. And that actually did trick the authorities for a while. They looked for the Franks in Switzerland for a while. And ultimately, they went to the annex and they stayed there from 1942 to 1944. This is Margot, Anne's older sister. They're a few years apart. And I think whenever she was called into deportation, she was about 16. So this is the bookshelf. It's at the bottom of this. So the annex is over a warehouse. And it's kind of like, if you drive through downtown Butler, a lot of the businesses on the bottom floor of the buildings have apartments over top of them. And that's kind of like what you could picture here. So there's a business at the bottom, like a warehouse with an office. And then on the top, there's this kind of apartment that's set up. And there's a stairwell behind this bookshelf, and they put a bookshelf there that's on hinges, so it hides the door. And that's how people who were helping them got into it without it being obvious that there was a door there. This is a stairway that leads to the upper floor. So the annex is laid out in a couple different levels, all of them quite small. I mean, this is a bed tucked in here underneath the annex. But you can see that they really did try to make it a home. This is Anne's room, and she has little pictures of movie stars that she likes. She has posters on the wall. She has her books. They continued to study. They continued to try to learn. You can see that they stashed belongings that they hoped that they could use later. So there's a bike here, and she was able to bring some things that would be of importance to her and make this more of a homey place to stay. So this is like the blueprint, I guess, of the annex. So down here is that bookshelf. So this would be where the people who were helping them would come and go. You can see there's like a staircase here that leads up to this little landing. So there's the bookshelf. And then you would go up the stairs to the family room. And there were people who slept in the family room as well, just because there weren't that many places to stay. Down here is a little toilet, a little wash closet that they couldn't actually use during the day because the sound from the pipes and the water would go down to the office workers, and they would be aware that there was somebody upstairs. So just a tiny little toilet here. As I'm looking around, that's the only one. So there are no other toilets in this area. No shower either. And then this is a double bedroom over here. So there's two beds. There's another little sitting room over here with a bed and a couch. Like I said, somebody would sleep up here. And then they had like a small kitchen in this area and a place where they could eat their meals together. So they stayed there for 2 years until August 4th, 1944, when the Gestapo, which is like the Nazi secret police, discovered and captured the Franks. They may have acted on a tip from some informants, some Dutch citizens who may have informed them. This guy here is the officer who oversaw the arrest of the people in the annex. There are some conflicting reports about who may have told on them. It might have been some people in the office at the bottom. It might have been the office underneath them got raided at one point. So it might have been somebody who overheard some movement up above and then used that to, like it was robbed. So it might have been somebody who used that as part of a deal. But the reports are conflicting. So there is no one true story about what happened to them. They, like many families, were separated and sent to different concentration camps. Anne Margot and her mother were separated from her father, and that was pretty common to separate men from women. They were first sent to Auschwitz, and then they were transferred to Bergen-Belsen in late October of 1944. Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz were both really, really large camps. Bergen-Belsen was, I believe, just a women's camp. Auschwitz was mixed gender, though. But these are some pictures of those. You can see here it says the infamous Belsen concentration camp liberated by the British on the 15th of April, 1945. 10,000 unburied dead were found here, so they found just 10,000 like piled up bodies there whenever they liberated it. Another 13,000 have died since. All of them were victims of the German New Order in Europe and an example of Nazi culture. Anne and Margot both died in Bergen-Belsen in late March of 1945. And like I said on the previous slide, the Allies liberated the camp on April 15th. So they missed liberation by just a couple weeks. When they died, Anne was 15 and Margot was 19. And there are a couple little plaques and burial, like memorials, but their bodies are not underneath here. There's no way to know what actually happened to their bodies. They may have been burned, they may have been cremated, but there is no way to know. Afterwards, her dad survived. So her dad went back to the annex and he recovered her diary. So on her 13th birthday, just a few weeks before they went into hiding, Anne's dad gave her a diary and she wrote in it from June 12th, which is right before they went into hiding, until August 1st, 1944. They were captured on August 4th. So she wrote in it pretty much her entire time that they were in hiding. And throughout it, she details what it was like to hide from the German Nazis during their occupation of the Netherlands. This is her writing, so she has little things pasted within it. It's just a little like plaid paste-bound book. So when he survived, he went back, he found out that her diary had survived, and he published it. There was a great interest in survivor stories at that time because the news of what had happened during the Nazi period was so startling and people were just like hungry for stories from it. So he published her diary for people to read 2 years after the war ended. And then it became immensely famous, and eighth graders across the country read it because you can relate to her as a 14-year-old and can kind of understand the emotional things that she's dealing with, even if you can't understand the particular situation that she's in. This was Otto in, this would be like right before he went into hiding. So this is what he would have looked like when he was in hiding. And then this was him in 1979, just a year before he died.